My fellow sojourners, let us begin with a vision. A man buried in a shallow grave in the east. The image startles us. A grave that cannot hide its body, a burial incomplete, a rising sun casts a light upon what refuses to be fully covered. Why the east? Why a shallow grave? And why must man be found there? The east, the place of beginnings. Genesis tells us, and the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden. That's Genesis, the 2nd chapter, verse 8. The east is where light begins its journey. It is the threshold of dawn, the place where shadows yield to illumination. But this man, humanity, you, me, lies in a shallow grave there, not buried deep, not gone forever, but half exposed, half hidden. The shallow grave is the place of unfinished transformation. It is where the old self is not fully crucified, not fully surrendered, but lingers, clinging to fragments of life. A shallow grave is not final. It covers but does not conceal. It suggests death, but also interruption. A burial without closure. Spiritually, it represents a soul that has glimpsed the light of Christ but resists complete surrender. Paul says in Romans chapter 6, verse 4, he says, we were buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead, so we also should walk in newness of life. But many souls are buried shallow. Baptism in water, but not in fire. Dipped in ritual, but not drowned in spirit. The shallow grave reveals compromise. The ego still breathes. The flesh still whispers. The grave is shallow because the self has not gone fully under. The east. The east, biblically, is always symbolic of illumination. Eden was planted in the east, the place of innocence and beginnings. The Magi came from the east, bearing gifts, seeking the newborn king in Matthew's, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 2. Ezekiel saw the glory of the Lord enter the temple through the east gate. Ezekiel, 43rd chapter, verse 4. The east is where light breaks. It is where the veil of darkness is torn by the rising sun. To be buried in the east is to be placed at the very edge of awakening, yet still held by death. Sojourners, here it is. Many stand in the east but remain half buried. They see the light, but they have not yet risen. They awaken, but not transformed. They are enlightened, but not resurrected. The shallow grave, from a metaphysical soul perspective, the shallow grave is the ego's last defense. It is the part of us that wants Christ without the cross, illumination without surrender, wisdom without sacrifice. It is partial awakening. But resurrection requires depth. A shallow grave cannot hold a risen soul. The Christ within calls us deeper. We must be fully buried, fully surrendered, fully emptied, so that we may be raised in fullness. The East reminds us that resurrection always begins at dawn. The tomb of Christ faced the rising sun. When the women came early in the morning, they found the stone rolled away, and the shallow grave of the east became the empty tomb of victory. Ask yourself this: where am I only half buried? What parts of my old self still cling to the surface? Where have I allowed light to touch me but refused to step fully into resurrection? Perhaps it is bitterness. Perhaps it is fear. Perhaps it is pride. These are the remnants of the shallow grave. Christ calls us not to linger half buried, but to surrender fully so that resurrection life can break forth. My fellow sojourners, hear me. The shallow grave is not the end. It is an invitation. It is the threshold where death trembles, but life knocks. To be found in a shallow grave in the east is to be found at the breaking of dawn, when the soul is paused between burial and resurrection. The call is clear. Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will give you life. Do not stay shallow. Let the ego die deeply. Let the flesh be buried fully. For only then can the true man, the inner Christ, rise in fullness. Let's meditate on this. Meditate on these words. In the east, a grave lies shallow, soul thin, like breaking through. Half buried man, half awake soul, still clinging to what he knew. But dawn goes not tarry, the sun will not wait. Rise from the shallow grave, O soul, step into your eternal fate. Sojourners, man is buried in a shallow grave in the east, but resurrection calls. Dawn is breaking, the light of Christ is rising. Will you remain half buried, or will you rise? The east is not the place of death. It is the place of rising. And the shallow grave is only a sign that death could not hold you. And the light will not let you go.